The Dygma Defy has been one of the most requested keyboards for me to look at, and today, that's finally happening. And I try to distinguish myself from other channels by providing information-rich, deep dive reviews. So this video might be a long one because there is a lot to talk about with this keyboard. A critique I've received on some of my other keyboard review videos is that there's not enough time spent just like looking at the keyboard, and that like I move it around too much or something like that. So but I'm really excited to talk about this keyboard. I just wanted to make sure that I got some close-up shots in there, but like I could probably just go on and on and on. And like I said, this is going to be a long one, so you know, buckle up. Yeah. Anyway, in full disclosure, Dygma Lab was kind enough to send me this keyboard to do a review, but like any of my review videos, these thoughts and opinions are my own. But Dygma has also been pretty clear that they want me to give my honest and authentic feedback, whether that's good or bad. And as a company, I really appreciated their willingness to be vulnerable and transparent. In preparation for this video, I asked you all for questions that you'd like me to answer about the Defy, and most of the questions were about how the Defy compares against other keyboards like the Glove 80 and the Voyager, and I'll be touching on various keyboard comparisons throughout this video. But I wanted to start with answering the question, who is the Dygma Defy even for? There's already several high-quality split mechanical keyboards on the market, but after using the Defy for several weeks, I personally think that this keyboard is actually a very compelling option within this already niche market. And out of my growing collection of pre-built split fully programmable mechanical keyboards that I've tried so far, I'd say the Dygma Defy probably has the broadest appeal, followed closely by the Voyager. In my recent four-way comparison video between the Moonlander, the Voyager, Glove 80, and the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro, out of those four, I recommended the Moonlander as the best option for an introduction into split mechanical keyboards. But as near and dear as this keyboard is to my heart, I would have given that crown to the Dygma Defy had it been in the mix. There's also the Dygma Raise 2, which looks like an even easier entry into split mechanical keyboards, although I haven't tried it yet. But if you need a productivity focused keyboard or require frequent access to many symbols, such as in software development, then I probably recommend the Defy over the Raise, just based on the number of thumb keys on the Dygma Defy. While digging for information and binge watching videos on Dygma Lab's YouTube channel, I noticed a recurring topic about ergonomic keyboard journeys, where you progressively get sucked further and further into increasingly unhealthy levels of obsession. They didn't phrase it quite like that, but they make some good points. I've showered a lot of praise on the Voyager, but when I've talked to friends and family or coworkers who say they're considering getting one, presumably based at least in part on my advocacy, I usually feel a small sense of anxiety that they'll actually get one and end up hating it, because the learning curves on these keyboards is no joke. It takes several weeks of constant use to adjust to a keyboard with a thumb cluster. Just the other day, a family member asked if she could buy one of my unused keyboards as a birthday present for her husband. My response was that I would no sooner gift someone a new puppy than I would a split mechanical keyboard. Transitioning to one of these keyboards is a commitment, and you have to be willing to go through the absolutely frustrating experience of retraining muscle memory that has been ingrained from years of typing on a traditional keyboard. With that said, I think it's totally worth it, and I can't imagine going back to a traditional keyboard. But before moving on from this point of like an ergonomic keyboard journey, Dygma's first and failed attempt at a split ergonomic keyboard, the Shortcut, was targeted at gamers but never made it into production due to its steep learning curve. And can I just say that this keyboard looks extremely compelling, and I'm actually really sad that it didn't come to market. Hopefully someday. Anyway, let's dive deeper into what makes the Dygma Defy stand out from the crowd, starting with the build quality. One of the comments left on the community post I mentioned earlier was about Dygma having production issues, and that, quote, people are receiving daily support from Dygma to resolve issues. So I asked the rep from Dygma who I've been working with about it and was totally expecting either denial or downplaying any issues with some kind of like PR filtered response. But nope, the response was like, yep, that is right. And they gave me a straight answer. And I've got to be honest, that was a breath of fresh air. The email went on to say, we try to be very transparent with our customers, and we're working hard to solve these things. In any case, we are very customer focused, and we have a close customer support with all of them and try to be quick in offering solutions. So kudos to them for not hiding that there are problems and taking accountability to address any issues. If you already have a Dygma Defy, I'd be curious to know if you've had problems with your keyboard and whether or not you've reached out to Dygma's customer support, and consider sharing your experience in the comment section below. But it's totally understandable to hesitate on getting this keyboard due to potential issues. It's still not clear to me exactly what these problems are. That still seems kind of nebulous, but as far as I can tell, there isn't like a single widespread problem that they haven't already addressed, unlike, for example, the well-known Bluetooth problem with the Pro version of the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro. Personally, I haven't had any problems with the Defy, and the overall build quality is really quite good. I have experienced some issues with the software side of things, but I'll get to that later on in the video. But the Dygma Defy actually has the best sound and feel, I would say by far, out of any of the keyboards that I've reviewed. The only quality control issues I noticed were some minor cosmetic issues with the seam on the base of the left palm rest and some odd discoloration on the bottom of the right palm rest. These issues don't have any functional effect on the keyboard, and they're so minor that I personally wouldn't have felt bothered enough to contact customer support. But you know, at the same time, it's kind of hard to expect anything less than perfection when you're spending between $400 to $600 on a keyboard. But they've communicated to me that they're committed to providing solutions and making things right with customers, so take it for what it is. So yes, there are some things Dygma is still working through, but there are some things that this keyboard does better, and I would argue much better than some of the competition. By the way, it takes a lot of effort to make these detailed videos, and if you appreciate this type of content, consider giving this video a like or subscribing to support my channel. I already mentioned that this keyboard has the best sound and feel out of the keyboards that I've reviewed. The double shot ABS keycaps have really good shine through, but I'm looking forward to Dygma offering PBT keycaps, which I like the feel of more, and also which are not grease magnets, unlike ABS. Personally, I prioritize ergonomics and hand health over things like thock or sound dampening, but that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate a nice keyboard with a great sound and feel. A common complaint about the Glove 80 is it doesn't feel like you're typing on a premium keyboard, which kind of makes sense because the density of a keyboard's chassis has a significant impact on things like thockiness and sound dampening. And because density and weight are strongly correlated, this explains in part why people associate weight with quality, but I suspect density is the more important variable. For example, despite the Voyager being over 100 grams lighter than the Glove 80, it feels nicer to type on. And I suspect that's largely due to the steel back of the Voyager, as opposed to the lightweight PC ABS material of the Glove 80. As far as the Dygma Defy goes, it has an anodized aluminum body, which actually helps it achieve a lighter weight while still feeling strong and durable, but with sound dampening foam on the inside for a better sound and feel. Plus, it has some pretty good key switches. When checking out, you're presented with the usual choice of linear, tactile, or clicky. I'm a little disappointed that you can't get any of the other options without paying for the extra switches, but the choice between linear, tactile, or clicky is pretty standard, And to be fair, they offer a pretty good discount for the extra switches. As someone who is prone to RSI flare-ups, I've found that having a key switch with a light actuation force is one of the most important factors in preventing typing fatigue. I am a software engineer by trade, so I use my keyboard a lot. And while a difference of about 20 gram force between something like the Kale Box Whites at 55 gram force and the Kale Silent Pinks at 35 gram force, it may not seem like a lot. But if you do a lot of typing, it can make an enormous difference over time, at least it has for me. With that said, I went with the choice of the Gateron G Pro Yellows and was really pleased with the quality and sound. But since having a low actuation force makes such a big difference for me, I almost immediately ordered some Gateron G Pro Whites and used those for the duration of the time I spent testing the keyboard, and then put the yellows back on for this video to do the recording. And while on the subject of checking out, let's talk about the price. There's a few customization options, including the choice between a black or white keyboard, the keycaps, the choice of switches, wireless or wired, built-in tinting, and the RGB underglow. The base option starts at $369, which is just $4 more than the Voyager. The wireless option is an extra $90, with the built-in tinting kit sitting at an extra $80, and the RGB underglow costing an extra $70. But it's only available if you get the wireless option and built-in tinting. Fully decked out like the model that I have right here, the total price comes to $609 US. And let's be real here, that's a hefty price tag and makes you start to question the value proposition here. The base model with a price tag of $369 seems pretty in line with other pre-built split keyboards, but personally, the lack of built-in tinting is a no-go for me, which is a shame because, in my opinion, Dygma absolutely nailed the tinting on the Defy. I'll get to that more here in a minute. But add the built-in tinting kit and the price goes up to $449, which is $50 more than the Glove 80 and about the same price as the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro, both of which have tinting and Bluetooth. Although, to be fair, it seemed like I had daily Bluetooth issues with the Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro, and the tinting only has 3 steps that you can lock into, whereas on the Glove 80, the tinting I still find to be quite finicky. But choose wisely because you can't add the tinting kit to the base model after the fact. I feel like they could have increased the value proposition on the base model quite a bit just by adding a simple and cheap tinting alternative such as threaded holes to screw in some legs like on the Glove 80. And despite my complaints, the Glove 80's tinting mechanism, it gets the job done. But like I said, Dygma absolutely nailed the built-in tinting on this keyboard. Out of all of the split keyboards that I've tried, hands down, this is the best implementation of tinting that I have seen. It's really easy to use and there's a nice range of angles to choose from. The legs fold completely into the body to lay the keyboard flat and goes up to 60 degrees. None of my other keyboards can achieve that aggressive of an angle without buying a mounting kit, which can easily put you out an additional $100. And in my testing, the keyboard remains sturdy in any configuration. Just don't forget to flip out the little side legs. You can also reverse tilt the keyboard, which could be helpful in maintaining a neutral wrist position for certain desk setups, such as where the keyboard is placed lower than elbow level. The only complaint I do have is that the legs feel just a little too loose at the hinge. If I'm not really careful when picking up the keyboard, the legs will just fall out, and I found myself constantly needing to reposition the legs on the angle selector because of this. But it turns out this is actually adjustable, though it requires taking the keyboard apart to access some screws, something I have not yet attempted. I already brought up the minor cosmetic issues I found, and it sounds like at one point the quality was much worse and it was one of those widespread issues that people experienced. For those of you who have already bought this keyboard and done so recently, this is another thing I'd be curious to learn about in the comments section, whether or not you've had quality control issues with the palm rests. But yeah, the inside is made of this compact foam and it really is quite comfortable. And after I've been typing for a while and my palms are nice and sweaty, which happens because I take programming very, very seriously, I feel like my palms stay cooler and more comfortable than they do on a hard plastic palm rest. They're held in place with magnets and are easy to remove for cleaning. The magnet strength, while nothing to write home about, is strong enough to keep them in place just fine. The Defy comes with a travel case, which is always a welcome addition, but one of those things that is also kind of hard to get excited about. It has a semi-flexible hard case with construction similar to the Glove 80's travel case, although the interior is lined with felt and has a nifty compartment space for stuff like a key switch puller or small cables, and it magnetically shuts. The length and width of the case are nearly identical to the Glove 80's case, but it's about half the width. I mostly work from home, but the one time I did take the Defy into the office, I opted to just toss the keyboard straight into my backpack without bothering with the case. Personally, I prefer the lighter cases, such as those that come with the Moonlander and the Voyager, which feel less bulky and, in my opinion, still provides plenty of protection while inside of a backpack. But I don't think anything is nearly as good as this new method of transportation, the keyboard holster. And when my kids get older, I will definitely be using this to embarrass them. Okay, the RGB. I think you have to see it in person to appreciate just how amazing it looks. Honestly, I kinda just wanted to stare at this for the first few days of using this keyboard. It basically turns the Dygma Defy into an art piece. I'm being a little over the top, but like honestly, the underglow looks really, really good. I was also really surprised at how bright the underglow gets, at least when it's on white. And it can get bright enough to the point that it's actually a little distracting. When talking about RGB backlighting, like just the lighting underneath the keys, Bazecor exposes about the same features as what you'd expect running a keyboard with QMK. As of right now, in mid-2024, ZMK still lags behind when it comes to RGB capabilities, most notably the lack of support for per key RGB and per layer RGB. While technically possible, it's still difficult to work with, at least in my experience, getting it to work on the Glove 80. Ta-da! On the Defy, while I didn't seem to get the 20 hours of battery life Dygma Labs' website says they aim for, I was able to get through 2 full 8-hour workdays with the backlighting turned on and the underglow set to about 75% brightness because 100% was too bright, and without fully draining the battery. This was a critique I had with my review of the Glove 80, which failed to get me through even a single workday before the RGB automatically turned off to conserve battery life, starting from a full charge and with the RGB set to a relatively low brightness. The underglow is definitely a luxury upgrade, but having seen it in person, I would be very tempted to spend the extra $70 for the underglow. And that's not to say it doesn't have some functional purpose. Handily, it can function as a desk light for those late night work or gaming sessions where you want to keep the lights off while still being able to see where you like set down your phone or to find that random cable hiding somewhere on your desk. Like many people, I find the backlighting helpful for that visual feedback while layer switching, or using per key RGB to highlight specific keys. This can be especially useful when learning a new layout, and is useful when accidentally toggling a layer. On the Glove 80, I occasionally still fat finger a key that toggles a layer switch, and since I usually keep the RGB off to save battery, there's always a few seconds of confusion that ensues afterwards. The Kinesis Advantage 360 Pro is a little better in this regard because it has backlighting as well as the little LED lights above the thumb cluster to let you know which layer you're on, and the Moonlander and the Voyager have built-in RGB, so it's not really an issue with those keyboards. But while making this video, I learned that Kinesis now has the Advantage 360 Signature series, which looks like the non-pro version with backlighting and optional wireless, or I guess you could also say it looks like the pro version but without exposing the underlying ZMK firmware. And now I'm dying to know if they fixed the Bluetooth problems. For those of you who have underglow RGB, you can change the color of individual LEDs going around the keyboard from within Bazecor. This is really neat, but you also can't click and drag to select multiple segments at the same time, making it rather tedious to use multicolored underglow designs, which can also be easily overridden by clicking the Apply Color to Underglow button, and also it lacks an undo or redo capability if clicked by mistake. And yes, I learned that the hard way. The thumb cluster, in my opinion, is among the best that I've tried, though your mileage may vary depending on the reach and dexterity of your thumbs. For those who are new to split keyboards with a thumb cluster, I think having more keys is better because it becomes less intimidating to take the leap into split keyboards and allows for some experimentation. And the more you experiment, the more you come to realize that less really is more. Personally, I'm still at the point where I think 3 keys per thumb is the sweet spot. Maybe after a few years, I'll ascend to the perfection of the 34 key layout after my neckbeard has grown in nice and thick. That is, unless I first switch to something like the Caracorder or the upcoming Master Forge keyboard, which I have already pre-ordered. Please don't tell my wife. Anyway, the top middle 3 thumb keys were comfortable for me to reach, with the top inner key feeling slightly uncomfortable and the far outer key feeling comfortable but requiring too far of a stretch. So I guess in a sense also uncomfortable. I barely found myself using the bottom row despite it being within reach of my thumbs, and I think I've decided that vertically positioned thumb keys just aren't a very great idea. The thumb is great at side-to-side movements, but you kind of have to bend your entire wrist to effectively move the thumb up and down between those 2 rows. As a result, I place some of my least used keys on the bottom row. Something I don't think I've seen shown in other videos is the bottom row uses low profile key switches, which I thought was interesting and I'd throw in here. Another unique thing about the Defy is the Neuron, which acts as the brains of the keyboard and stores layout and customization settings. There isn't a whole lot to talk about here other than I'd be worried about losing it because I can easily see myself forgetting to take it to the office, or leaving it at the office, or having one of my kids come in and take it and run off with it. I also feel like it should have a label to indicate which side to plug in when using RF mode. It's not hard to figure out, but it's not quite what I'd call intuitive. There's 3 basic configurations, which is wired using the Neuron as a USB hub, low latency RF mode, where the Neuron is connected to a computer via USB, and finally Bluetooth mode, where the Neuron connects directly into the bottom of the Defy. The Bluetooth, which can store up to 5 profiles or 5 connections, has worked flawlessly for me, and it does this cool little animation while making the connection. So you might be wondering if I'll be switching to using this keyboard as my daily driver, and the answer is no, for 2 main reasons. After I made my Glove 80 review, I switched back to the Voyager for a few months, but RSI symptoms slowly started creeping back up, so I've gone back to the Glove 80 for a couple months now. Despite a few gripes I have with the Glove 80, the ergonomics are simply unbeatable. So that's reason number 1. So if RSI was not an issue for me, then the second reason would be the firmware and software, which in my opinion is the Dygma Defy's Achilles heel. Now, don't get me wrong, Bazecor is perhaps the most visually appealing configurator I've used and one of the more user-friendly. One of the reasons I'm such a fan of ZSA's keyboards is because they use the Oryx configurator. Conversely, one of my biggest complaints about the Advantage 360 Pro was the absence of a layout configurator that's capable of using the advanced features of ZMK that you pay to get access to. It'd be like paying extra for a jailbroken iPhone and then having to manually edit config files to change your settings every single time. The Defy's firmware is based on Kaleidoscope. I'm not familiar with Kaleidoscope, but it strikes me as an odd choice given the popular alternatives of QMK or ZMK, both of which have strong communities and a growing set of features. Anecdotally, my sense that this was an odd choice seems to be backed up by kaleidoscope.keyboard.io, which says Kaleidoscope is built on top of Arduino with novice-focused APIs. For those unfamiliar, Arduino markets itself as an easy-to-use hardware and software platform with a target audience of aspiring hardware or embedded software engineers, or used by professionals for rapid prototyping. To be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I suspect Arduino is used successfully in production environments. My worry comes from Bazecor being unable to stay relevant if Kaleidoscope can't match the development pace of QMK and ZMK, although I guess there is that bit about ZMK's lack of support for RGB, but if there was one feature that I would have to throw out, it probably would be RGB. So aside from the firmware, Bazecor is very user-friendly, possibly more so than the Oryx configurator. Something you VIA fans would appreciate is the ability to make live edits to your layout without needing to flash changes to the keyboard. This was a great quality of life improvement, but unfortunately, it lacks the layout customization features that I've become accustomed to with QMK and especially ZMK. Home row mods have become a staple part of my keyboard layout. Quickly explained, home row mods are keys placed on the home row which act as modifier keys when held, like Control or Shift, or act like regular keys when tapped. Home row mods are game-changing when you dial the settings in just right, but it can be kind of a nightmare on the other hand when it's misconfigured. One of the main drawbacks of home row mods is accidentally activating modifier keys. With Oryx, which uses QMK firmware, I was able to greatly reduce the number of misfires I typed by tweaking the tapping term for individual keys. I use a fairly quick tapping term of 160 milliseconds on the frequently used shift modifier under my fast and nimble index fingers, and a much slower 225 milliseconds on the less used alt key under my slower ring fingers. On the Glove 80, which uses ZMK, I have this dialed in even more using a flavor of home row mods called timeless home row mods. This configuration goes beyond the scope of this video, but essentially it's a configuration of home row mods that aims to be timerless, or in other words, doesn't rely on specific timings, hence the moniker of timeless home row mods. This configuration almost completely eliminates misfires. I'll put a link in the description if you want to learn more. Anyway, all of that to say that at the time of recording, Bazecor allows you to add or remove a modifier, but that's about it. You can adjust timings globally under the preferences section, but the customization options are pretty underwhelming, and I was back to constantly activating modifiers unintentionally. I have no doubt that over time, some of these more advanced features will make their way to Bazecor, but as of now, it's missing other features that are personally important to me, including the per key tapping term that I just mentioned, and combos, key repeat behavior on dual function, i.e. mod tap keys, and caps word. These are admittedly more advanced features, but it's a showstopper for me. Aside from that, I experienced what seemed like many random little bugs in the software, and it kind of felt like I was using a beta version. Personally, I didn't run into any bugs that weren't easily fixed by resaving my configuration or just power cycling the keyboard. As I mentioned near the start of this video, Dygma has been openly transparent about the presence of bugs in Bazecor, and the GitHub repository reflects that the developers are actively working on it. But I will give it to them that the macro editor is light years ahead of Oryx, which feels pretty basic compared to Bazecor. Oryx limits you to 5 key presses per macro, and as a Vim user where key combinations are baked into all that I do, that limit is pretty disappointing. I can't cite this resource, but I swear I read somewhere that the 5 key limit is to prevent people from storing passwords in a macro. On the other hand, Bazecor lets you add far more key presses. In fact, it might let you add too much. Just for fun, I tried copy pasting in one of my YouTube video scripts that had about 4,300 words in it, and it made Bazecor freeze for a few seconds whenever I clicked anywhere on the timeline. I was too afraid what would happen if I tried saving the macro to my keyboard, so I did not try that. Bazecor also has a beta feature they're calling super keys, which seems pretty much identical to the tap dance functionality that can be implemented with QMK and ZMK. You can assign a single key to do different things depending on if it's tapped, held, tapped and held, double tapped, or double tapped and then held. Honestly, there wasn't much there that excited me. And finally, the last topic to touch on is modding. The Defy can be fully disassembled, which opens up a world of possibilities for those who are truly creative. For myself and everyone else, the Defy comes with an enhancement kit, which, despite the tantalizing name, simply contains some O-rings and a switch puller, microfiber cloth, and a mini brush. But the most exciting thing for me was the inclusion of 10 test switches. It's pretty much impossible. In fact, I would say it's impossible to know how a particular switch will feel without typing on a keyboard full of those switches, but the extra test switches is way better than nothing. The Defy also has 4 M3 screw holes on its base for attaching things like a mounting kit or the previously mentioned keyboard holster. Dygma doesn't offer a mounting kit, at least not currently, but there are existing solutions if you look hard enough. I read a post on Reddit that said the spacing of the threaded holes is the same as the Moonlander, so I 3D printed a random tenting kit for the Moonlander, and then I tried to put it on the Dygma Defy. While trying to put it on, I made 2 important discoveries. The first discovery was that the anodized aluminum was soft enough for the screws to bite into the metal and damage the keyboard, even though I didn't feel like I was putting that much pressure onto them. The second discovery was that I should have verified the information that I found on Reddit. It turns out that the spacing for the Moonlander's screw holes is 19 millimeters and accepts M2.6 screws. I didn't even know M2.6 was a thing, but I used M2.5 screws and those fit just fine. Ironically, I'm also taking this information from a different Reddit post, but it's a quote, so clearly it's factual. But the Dygma Defy uses a spacing of 19.5 millimeters and accepts M3 screws. So stay safe, kids, and don't believe everything you read on the internet. So what's the verdict? The Dygma Defy is an impressive keyboard, and it stands out in many ways, especially the RGB underglow, and I think my favorite feature, the built-in tinting. While it does have some drawbacks, especially with the firmware and software and a couple minor quality control issues, the overall experience for me was really quite positive. If you're looking for a high quality split mechanical keyboard with a really good sound and feel, then the Dygma Defy is a very strong contender. Personally, I will be sticking with the Glove 80 as my daily driver due to how ergonomic it is and the advanced firmware features that I rely on. However, the Defy's strengths make it a compelling choice for, I would say, a lot of users, especially due to the great built-in tenting kit like I talked about, and if you can afford it, the really great looking RGB underglow. If you're interested in purchasing the Dygma Defy, consider using the affiliate link in the description to support the channel. And if this video helped you in any way, consider leaving a like, and if you want to learn more about any of the keyboards I mentioned in this video, click on one of the cards which should be showing up on the screen about right now. And as always, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you next time.